Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Richard. How are you doing? How was the week?
I'm doing I'm doing well actually. Had a really good week. Lots of interesting, fun things going on. Was in Boulder last week. You were in Arizona, I
Arizona.
believe.
Yes, I was in
Yep,
Arizona. I loved it. Sedona was beautiful. How was Boulder?
it was fantastic. Yeah, we were blessed with really good weather. Lots of friends. I was there for work as well, so I ran a workshop, and yeah, now we're back. And this has been an interesting week. As usual, for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, what we do here is essentially an analysis of what's happening in the generative AI space. Both Chris and I have backgrounds in product design, digital product design, and so we generally bring a perspective as makers, as creators, to this conversation. If you want to know the blow by blow news, we cover that on the Maginative.com website. So you can get a digest of that each week, or you can read the individual stories by just going to the website, Maginative.com. In this podcast, we will be talking about specific stories, but also analysis of those stories. So why don't we just jump in? We've got quite a big announcement this week from OpenAI. Let's talk about that first, and then we can cover some of the other topics.
Yeah, Richard, this was one of those weeks where you had so many big news from the major AI players that I was like, how do you effectively cover this for people to
Mm,
digest it all? And so I want to kind of set the stage. Google I/O happened this week, and that is announced months in advance. So everybody knew that this was happening. But last week, Friday, OpenAI kind of just dropped that, hey, we're going to have an update event on Monday, just for Google I/O. And we have some exciting stuff. It's not GPT-5, it's not anything crazy, it's not AGI, but we're going to have an event that you're going to love. And
mhm,
so on Monday, they had an event. It was very intimate, very small at their headquarters, maybe 26 minutes. They demoed GPT-4o, which is their new multimodal model, and O stands for Omni. And one
mhm.
of the exciting things, I think, just from a presentation standpoint, that struck me as I compared their 26-minute event to Google I/O, which was, their Google's major developer conference, thousands of people. And I thought, Google is announcing some really incredible things here, but it's all getting lost. OpenAI
Mm,
announced like one focused product, and people were
mhm.
still talking about that at the end of the week versus all these great announcements. And I think companies will want to rethink that strategy because as I thought back to even NVIDIA's event earlier this year, they announced so much that got lost. And I think people have like this threshold of how many new things they can really appreciate from
Right.
a company's announcement, and so they'll want to think about that messaging strategy. I thought that Google did a really great job earlier this year in February when they announced like every week they had a new announcement for Gemini, right? And they were
Mhm.
always in the news cycle. We had something new to dive deeper into. Versus this week, it just felt like a lot of their big announcements got lost.
Yeah, and I think this is a reflection of what we've seen as product creators, as product developers. Um, Lots of small releases, lots of small decisions versus one big release, one big decision. And I
Yeah.
think that's always been the differentiator between teams that are healthy versus not healthy is that teams that are releasing consistently have this opportunity to be able to have that clarity of message, but they also have a different kind of as you say, a threshold for be able to understand and also a different, say, stress level
Hmm.
because instead of it all being this single moment where all eyes and all attention is on that big release, there's these lots of small things. And if there is a problem, they can check those bugs and fix those things and kind of roll back what they need to. And so we as makers recognize that that works both in the team setting and the organizational setting, but it actually works in terms of marketing and go to market. Is that
Yeah.
when you're releasing things on a kind of incremental basis, you have the opportunity to both fine tune and clarify that message and make it land, especially in a world that's so noisy. And then also you have the opportunity to roll back mistakes and fix those bugs that if necessary. So for those of you who are in a position where you have to make messaging choices, go to market choices, we often find that the kind of smaller cohorts, smaller releases tends to land a little bit better. And it's also a lot more sustainable from a kind of a stress or an
Yeah.
anxiety point of view.
Exactly. And to that point, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, has been responding to a lot of requests like, when are you going to release GPT-5? Because it's been over
Mm.
a year now since they've released
Hmm.
GPT-4. And it's incredible because that model is still the state of the art for all intents and purposes. And he said he wasn't even sure if they were going to call it GPT-5. Maybe he's thinking of doing more of an iterative rollout where you're continuously updating the model versus these major releases.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. So it's an indication of product maturity, really.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
As you think of what they announced, so GPT-4o is an omni model. And to put it in context, you had them release GPT-4, which was multimodal, meaning it could see an image and analyze and understand it. They had their
Mhm.
voice engine, which was basically text to speech. And then they had Whisper, which was transcription. And the GPT-4o brings all of these into one model that ends up being a lot more capable because it's almost like you're giving it these senses, right? And so we
Mhm.
have these different senses that we use, and rather than them being individual, now it's this one cohesive model. And they showed a demo on stage of how this would work, and it was impressive. You saw that interaction, and what I want to stress here is they didn't set out to release a new model. What I think they really set out to do here is to update our priors as to what the user experience interacting with an artificial intelligence could be. Because I think
Mhm.
they released ChatGPT and everybody assumed, hey, it needs to be a chatbot and let's all make a chatbot for our AI products and tools. And they said, well, hold on a sec. What about voice? What about visuals? And so this new model, I think, represents the baseline that we can expect for a user experience with AI moving forward. You saw the demo, Richard. What did you think?
I thought it was great. I was delighted by it because it felt a lot more applicable and relevant to the day to day of somebody's life. It was also something that I saw being connected to the modality of the mobile phone, which I think
Mm,
we hadn't seen too much before. One of the failures of both rabbits and also, say, the humane pin is that they are tethered to the phone. And so you start asking yourself these questions like, well, why do I need another device? We have seen in the past that there's no substitution effect. So people tend to buy a thing but not get rid of the old thing. And this is actually creating a lot of device or kind of related fatigue, digital fatigue. So I really like it when I start to see how this thing can integrate into an existing modality or an existing set of behaviors. Um, Again, I think we're still seeing the early days, the kind of awkward teenage phases of what this will look like. But I
yeah.
do, I mean, I ranted about this a couple of weeks ago, where I really don't understand why so many companies feel like, creating new things requires an additive strategy. I really
Mm,
do feel strongly about it being something that they should be considered through the lens of subtraction. What can we take away? What can we
mm,
remove? I think the fact that you've got this omni modality or this multimodal set of features is really, again, anthropomorphic in the sense that we do have a synesthetic relationship with our senses. Eyesight doesn't live in context of only eyesight. It lives in
mm,
the context of touch and hearing and experiences and thoughts and feelings. All of those things have a synesthetic kind of impact on the way that we understand. And so that experiential or lived experience is really, really important for us to work towards when we're designing these products. You have to think about the context. So yeah, that's a word salad for saying I like where we're headed. Again, I would like to see more subtractive invention. We'll
mhm.
get to this in the section where we talk about SaaS products. I want to see less UI and I want to see more experience.
I love that. So Google, of course, had a similar rollout at Google I/O on Tuesday, right? They announced Project Astra. And so
Mhm.
if you think of what OpenAI showed with their demo, Google showed with Project Astra, hey, we're going to bring this experience down the road and you'll be able to use your phone or smart glasses, which is a
Mhm.
major hint that they're probably about to enter that space again. So Meta is basically being put on alert here, and you can experience the world with this intelligence able to assist you. And I thought the demos were very compelling. It was one
Mhm.
take, just walking around. You got
Mhm.
to appreciate the latency. You got to appreciate just the responses and the quality of the responses. How do you think Astra's demo compared to like OpenAI's? And I mean, let's talk about Astra because we've been on OpenAI a little bit. What do you think about what Google is doing?
Well, again, I think it is leaning into exactly what we talk about, and that's how does this stuff work in the real world?
Hmm.
How do we actually apply this? AI does still feel to a lot of people to be kind of, science fiction. It's, the domain of engineers, the domain of programmers. Um, I think when we start to see something like Project Astra, where somebody's walking around the office saying things like, "Hey, where did I leave my glasses?" and how can you help me with this particular code snippet? Or here's a whiteboard that I've got this diagram. Can you help me understand how I can make this particular flow diagram more efficient? These are all very, very applicable things that I would use in my work environment every single day. I think back to the time when we were designing products in an office and we had a whiteboard and we'd have people fiddling with different versions of that and thinking about the ecosystems. How many times would you have to take a photograph, then import that into, say, a whiteboard visualization app or something like that, and then go back and forth. Now these things are happening in real time. You feel like that copilot, that assistant is living inside your device. And so this is why I'm excited. I see us starting to connect the dots between what is science fiction, or at least is the domain of engineers, and what is applicable to the average person doing the average kind of work that you would expect to see at an office or a work from home environment.
No, it's funny because I remember you'd lead these design sprint workshops, right? And I'm
Mm.
thinking how different an experience that's going to be moving forward when you have an
Yep.
intelligence layer, right? To
Yeah. I
synthesize
mean, I'm
everything.
I'm going over to my next door neighbor's house. He's an engineer. He's had a very successful exit recently, and he has got some new ideas as to what he wants to do. And of course, we're going to start with the whiteboard.
Yeah.
We're going to start with, hey, let's throw some spaghetti against the wall. Let's see what sticks. This is what we in design parlance we call as the divergence stage, where you're kind of coming up with ideas. Brainstorming was another version of that. But then start to apply these things with a level of intelligence that we haven't seen before, which is I'm kind of stuck here, or I don't really understand this relationship between these two things, or is there a business model here, or could you suggest some connections that we can't see with our human brains? That combined with memory, I think is going to
Mhm.
be really interesting. I was talking to one of the companies that I'm advising with this week, and we spoke a lot about the fact that we can use memory now to start building up anticipatory meetings, or uh, preparation for the future is going to be a consequence of the kind of conversations that we've had in the past. So think of the CRM environment in which, yes, I have input in the CRM. I'm making calls and I'm putting those inputs into the CRM. But there's two things that are happening. One is I'm a human being and I'm going to forget stuff. The other thing that's happening is that during the lifetime of an account, many pieces of information are going to change, and those people that are going to work on that project are going to change. So I might be working on the project, but 6 months ago it was somebody else working on the project, especially in agency and consulting environments. But I mean, there's staff turnover in every business. And so now the CRM starts to look at this through the lens of, well, what would you potentially forget? It's not just forgetting my glasses on the table somewhere. It's like, hey, you forgot that you had this really important conversation with your customer. And I'd like to remind you, and actually maybe even set up a meeting for you. And here's some pre-meeting intelligence, as we're now calling it, to be able to see those conversations. So we're now starting to use AI not only as a way to fill in some of the gaps of where human beings are maybe less efficient,
Hmm.
in terms of just like knowledge, or knowledge recall, I should say, but also more importantly, like, well, what happened in the past, and what I generally need to remember for this particular thing that I probably won't remember. And so using that and feeding that into a system of pre-meeting intelligence is going to be really powerful. I mean, the modality that we're using right now is, again, UI-less,
Hmm.
in that you will actually, once you set a meeting in your calendar, that will prompt the application to go and do the work for you and say, you and I are meeting. It would say, hey, you got a meeting with Chris. Here's a dossier or a report of everything you need to know about Chris, including things like, here are quotes from his previous podcasts. Here are some insights that he's had over the last several months as he's written. And I will be able to then see kind of an executive summary of who I'm meeting with, what's important to that person, a personality profile, and also some of the conversation pieces from the past. That's really, really helpful to me because I'm a human being and I forget, and I'm flawed.
100%.
I'm flawed.
100%. Richard, SaaS is dead. I wanted to have a session just kind
Let's
of
go
talking
there.
about. I love that. Before we talk about that though, there's something I want to point out here, because when you look at Project Astra, you look at the GPT-4 Omni model and the demos that both companies gave. I
Mm,
thought I thought Astra was compelling, right? Real time walk through the office, the glasses, very compelling.
yeah.
But what I appreciated about, again, OpenAI's approach, 26 minutes, but also just these clips that they released afterwards, they showed a demo of Salman Khan from Khan Academy working with his
Mm,
son Imran and doing a math problem. And you
yes.
saw
Saw that.
where
Yeah.
the AI was able to just watch his son working through the problem and act as a tutor to help to guide him without telling him the answer. And I thought,
Right.
wow, you see it and immediately you appreciate the potentiality and the possibilities of what.
You just immediately thought about all the frustration you've saved yourself in trying to. Like, listen, because I know I got three kids, and trust me, you will not be able to keep up with them. You will not be able to tutor them. They come home with their homework. They say, "Hey, I need to solve for this equation, or this is the algebra or the trigonometry we're working on right now," and you will just be like, "I don't remember anything from my school days. I don't even understand the methodologies that they're using." So I think that's where this could save relationships,
Yeah,
right? This could
yeah,
save families, because you will not be screaming at your children or not be deciding, which parent gets to do the
exactly.
math homework.
And then the second demo that I thought was really great was from Be My Eyes. So you have a blind person walking through the city, and
Amazing.
he's
Yeah.
able to just use his camera and in real time get feedback. What are the ducks doing? Is the king in residence? Can you help me to hail a cab? And
Yeah.
so
That's
the
incredible.
cab is
Yeah.
coming and it's like, okay, you can hail the cab now. Like, brilliant, right? And I
Yeah.
think it's an opportunity for companies, whether you're a startup or a bigger enterprise, to really look and be thoughtful about your
Mm.
messaging and what you're communicating, because you need to communicate value with the technology. It's not just, oh, we have this new great model. It's how is that actually beneficial to people in their real worlds, in their work? How can you communicate that effectively?
Well, again, we're coming full circle. So Be My Eyes is a really good example of a UI-less experience.
Hmm.
Uh, Here is a blind person who is not seeing or touching a screen. They are being communicated to through the voice of the AI, through their own voice, through the experience of the sensors within the device. This is, again, a mobile device that this blind person is carrying. Um, I'm not sure if this is relevant, but both the Astra and the Be My Eyes demos happened in London. I don't know if that's a foretelling of what's going on.
Yeah,
Maybe London's like the new cool place to do UI design, or
yeah.
lack of UI design. But I think the connective tissue here to your very bold statement that SaaS is dead is what we're seeing is an urgency to create solutions or experiences that do not necessarily need yet another login to yet another application to yet another platform that has to be installed into your stack.
Hmm.
This is whether it's a personal or corporate situation. We now have a stack of things that we have to use, and it's overwhelming. We need products to manage our products to manage our products. I mean, I don't even remember my passwords.
Yep.
I have to have a product for that, and I've got another product to back up that thing. And it's now got to the point where our digital fatigue has got to an extreme level, and we are just done. So I'm really, really quite buoyed by the excitement around these things. As a creator, I'm like, yeah, less is more. Um, there is one counter argument to this, and that
Yeah.
is maybe we're moving from SaaS to platform, in the sense that SaaS might be dead. In other words, instead of adding more Lego blocks to that kind of big Lego base set, what we're looking at is recognizing that that base set is really important.
Mm.
And we're thinking of maybe a future where platform as a service is ultimately more useful than just the SaaSs
Mm.
that kind of sit on top of that.
Yeah.
I'm hosting an event here in Boston on the 18th of June, and one of the speakers will be a very good friend of mine, Geordie Cadies, who used to be my head of strategy at Freshfield Soil. He is now head of design at Heroku, which is a Salesforce company,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he'll be speaking on that specific topic is, what is platform as a service? What does that look like? How does it change the stack? What does AI have to do with that? So if you're a design, product, or engineering leader and you want to be part of that, go to knapsack.cloud and see if you can get an invitation. Limited spaces, but we'll be talking about this on the 18th of June.
That sounds like an amazing event. Definitely,
Mm.
if you can get in, I would encourage it. I know Jordy. I've had conversations with him around AI and just the future of platforms. I definitely would love to be there if I were
I think
able
we
to.
should get him. We should get him as a guest on the show as well.
Yeah, we should. That's actually a good idea. So one of the interesting things when we talk about SaaS is dead, the framing I like to use is sometimes people talk about AI as the new gold rush. And, during that time, they're like, sell picks and shovels. And the
Right.
reality is, if you provide simply another tool today, that's not enough, right?
Right.
Even this week, we saw Google make a bold step after 25 years of basically the same fundamental experience of what search is like. You'd go to Google
Yep.
search, you'd put in a query, and Google would give you these list of links, right? They have tweaked
Mm-hmm.
it over the years in terms of the UI. But for the first time, they're going to actually do the Google searching for you and give you the answer. So moving
Mm-hmm.
forward, they have announced by the end of this year, it's going to be a complete global rollout. When you do a Google search, they're going to use generative AI and they're
Yeah.
going to actually summarize and be helpful with the results rather than saying, here are hundreds of thousands of links for you to go and search through yourself. And I think there's a much bigger message in that for companies thinking about how they're going to build products and services for the future. When you
Right.
have intelligence as an opportunity to add to your product, you have to deliver value. And that value is going to be outcomes based, right? If
Yeah.
you're, as you mentioned with a calendar, it's not just, hey, this is a new cool calendar tool that is slightly better in design. You
Yeah.
need to say, okay, how can I help with getting you prepared for your meetings, looking at past events and this pre-meeting preparation, I think is going to be key. And so it's exciting to see Google finally kind of have their wake up call. I guess Perplexity and the growth of Bing really pushed them to realize that, hey, we can try to hang on to this ad based model.
You can
or
imagine it's a difficult conversation for them to have because
yeah.
essentially cannibalizing their core product. Meta's the same. Got you can ignore for a second the fact that they try to create a metaverse that failed. But their core business is advertising.
Yeah.
Google's core business is advertising, and so I think we're starting to see a mindset change or a mind shift where, and I don't think it comes without problems. Like the concern I have is that answer that they are going to give me the best answer.
Hmm.
Right now, I would say it's probably not. I would say
Yeah.
it's definitely trending towards better solutions, but they are not perfect. And when I get an answer from ChatGPT or Gemini, and I say, hey, this is what I'm looking for, and it gives me an answer, and I query the answer. I was like, well, how can you be that sure about that? What's your confidence level?
Yeah.
It's not always perfect, right?
Hmm.
So I think we also have to understand that we're in a phase, this awkward teenage phase, where we've got pimples on our face and hair on places we didn't even know we had, and we're just like, trying to figure it out. We don't really know what the answer is exactly. So I look, my caution is, I like the idea of taking the step towards an outcome versus just
Hmm.
sending me a bunch of links. I don't really need a bunch of links. Nobody does. But I do think we also have to be cautious that these are truly models that have the significant value in mind of the objectivity of that versus, oh, I just thought you'd like this because that's what I've been trained to think. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I heard one particular story which bothered me, and that was um, a, uh, a result was returned to a user, and they queried as to the original to the objectivity or the origin of this, and the LLM actually admitted that it had made it up because they just wanted to make them happy. So I
Wow.
think there is like some serious concern there. I don't think that's universal, and I'm sure that was kind of like a bug that could be easily fixed. But the problem is AI ultimately trends towards being human.
Yeah.
and humans lie.
Yeah.
Humans are people pleasers. They try and send you, like, if you ask me and I don't want to disappoint you, I might just tell you whatever you wanted to hear. And that's true of humans. Humans are trying to make relationships the highest part of the value chain, and so sometimes they'll do weird things to get there.
Yeah, so I think this is an opportunity, especially for designers, because we're at this stage where, as you're mentioning, like, how do you instill confidence in the person doing that search that your results are accurate? How do you do it in a way where you can still provide the summary, but also inform them that, hey, you may want to check this. But there's also this big question about creators. I invested time in creating this content on my website. Now you're going to take this response and provide it to a user. If I'm relying on advertising or some sort of model that depends on traffic directly to my website, how does that work? And so I think the web is
Mhm.
going to be in a really interesting space now. And we need to start being creative as to how that compensation model works now with creators, and how we can navigate towards a world where everyone can benefit from the work that they're putting in.
Look, it's too early to say it's going to change immediately, but it will change. For
Mhm.
sure, the advertising model is not the right incentive, right? We're essentially saying stare at the screen and in return we'll give you some good entertainment. Uh, we are the product in that environment, right? In
Yeah.
that situation or that business model, the human being that's staring at the screen is the product. And that is something that our younger generation, I look at my kids and I look at how very, very aware that they are being essentially exploited as the product in that
Mhm.
advertising model. And they are choosing not to be part of it.
Yeah. They're
they also
rejecting.
recognize, yeah, they recognize that the influence model is the same, right? So it's just to take an individual and turn them into a product, and then that product eventually becomes something you have to stare at in order for you to, get the entertainment value. Yeah, so it will change. How long it'll take to change, I don't know. I think that really depends on just how quickly the value that's produced by these new models exceeds the existing experience. So again, we have to keep in mind that the reality is we are not there yet, right? These
Mhm.
are awkward teenagers. These are flawed models. These are learning still. Yeah, you have to. I mean, apologies for the anthropomorphic comparison, but the these are still learning. The models and the people who create the models and the outcomes are all in this very, very steep learning curve. And so we have to, be thoughtful about, how we respond to these. And again, the hype is real. This
Yeah.
I am a little, I'm a little bored with the hype. I'd actually like to see more of the value, like we're seeing from these demos, and I'd like to see more conversations about how designers and developers and engineers are actually doing the work to lean into these problems versus just like, oh my God, AI is going to steal my job. Like, okay, we've heard that. It's boring. What are you going to do about it? Let's move
Exactly.
on.
Exactly. One thing to kind of just drop in here, there's this really interesting conversation from Nicholas Thompson at the Atlantic. He does these most interesting thing in tech, where he talks about whether or not we should be this obsessed with making AI like humans, right? And whether or not there is a space that AI should occupy that doesn't
Yeah,
reflect a lot of the human conditions that
totally.
we have. And so if you're interested, definitely check out his post on social media. It's a great conversation. And but I want to kind of shift our conversation now to some of the other tools that Google announced from IO this week, specifically around learning and education, right? So they announced LearnLM, which, as you know, at Maginative, we're passionate about literacy, especially AI literacy. And so when we see companies investing in tools or products that are optimized for education, that are trying to make it easier for people to learn, like, we get excited. And so that's LearnLM. Google basically said, hey, these Gemini models, they're great, but we want to ensure that they're doing a better job of teaching people, learning
Mhm.
how people are learning, and providing information. And you're also seeing this shift in terms of how they're recognizing that their products are being used. So here's the thing, like, my 5 year old, my 4 year old, they'll come to me and they'll be like, Daddy, can we learn about crocodiles? And what they
Mm.
mean is they want me to go to YouTube and find a video about crocodiles
Yeah. Yeah.
for them to learn. And I'm thinking, wow, for them, YouTube is like this secondary teacher, right? That they can go and
Right.
ask anything and learn from. And so you see this opportunity that I think Google is picking up on. How can we make our products better at teaching, at helping to educate people? And so there are a couple of tools that they announced alongside LearnLM. One is this tool called Illuminate, and they showcase this with Notebook LM, where basically you can take a research paper and Illuminate will pretend to be two individuals discussing the paper, and then you can
Mm.
jump into that discussion and participate in the conversation. And I thought that was just brilliant. And then the second
That's
is
amazing.
called
Yeah.
Learn About, where you can just learn about any topic. And so it's
Hmm.
almost like a reimagination of Google, where, okay, you want to learn about solar flares and auroras, and you just go there and it would be this really interactive experience. So what are your thoughts on learning, specifically
Yeah.
around these products that Google is creating?
So I think that we have to look at the context, right? So the education system that we currently have was designed to allow people to move from the agricultural environment in which they were tending fields, they were kind of raising crops and, you know, animal husbandry, and give those people the skills to be able to work in a factory. So
Mm,
that's how the education system developed. That model was essentially telling people, look, here's how to focus on very specific tasks for long periods of time where you are going to be either sitting or static in an environment, in a closed environment. And so if you look at schools, schools look like that. Right?
ah,
Schools look like that environment. They train children to stop running around. They train children to sit and listen, to be obedient. They train them to be very task orientated, and they grade them on their ability to successfully achieve those tasks as administered or as instructed. That is no longer a system that works for the modern human, right?
yeah,
That no longer serves either the industry or the individual. And so the way that, as you kind of prompted the conversation, the way that this evolution needs to happen is that we need to start individualizing and customizing education for the neurodiversity that makes us so powerful as human beings.
yeah,
Making us all homogeneous and be able to do all the same things at the same time and then get graded on a curve is actually the very, very antithesis of how evolution works. Evolution works on the fringes. The
yeah,
more mutations you have, the more ability you have to experiment with different ideas, different outcomes, different changes in how you interact with that environment. Plus, we have a changing environment. It always has been
yeah,
changing. It's now changing very quickly. And so, what I anticipate, or what I'd like to see from these learning tools, is not just an ability to amplify what we currently have, amplify this factory system of learning, but rather start to see individuals as being autodidactic, which just means they can teach themselves, and say, okay, well, how do you learn? Right, Chris,
mhm,
you probably learn differently from me. I know that. So being dyslexic and having some word retrieval issues as a child made me very, very, very conscious of other ways of learning. I
mm,
listen very, very carefully. I can't read and write as well as the other person. I mean, I taught myself to do that, but
yeah,
at the time, it was very difficult for me to be successful in that factory environment, that kind of, you know, both elementary school or primary school, as we called it, high school, and
mhm,
then school. But it made me very, very aware of listening to what was being said because I had to understand that, because I was probably not going to learn from a textbook.
yeah, yeah,
And that gave me a certain set of skills where I can be very present in a conversation. I can listen to what's being said. I can recall that better than if I learn from a textbook. I hope that an AI or LM system is going to be able to recognize how I learn. So it might give me some assessments to see, oh, Richard, you learn like this. We've noticed that you're very good at these kinds of learning techniques or these kinds of modalities,
mhm,
and then customize my learning for that. And I think your 4 and 5 year old have a similar experience to what James, my 8 year old, has experienced, and that is he taught himself how to read and write and do math entirely through YouTube Kids.
yep,
Entirely. I had nothing to do with it. I was tending to a very sick wife at the time. I did not have time to give him attention, and he literally went and learned those skills on his own just by watching videos. I imagine that we could have an AI layer that says, we've noticed that James learns in this way, that he
Mm-hmm.
responds to these stimuli. Okay, let's see if we can advance that or amplify that in his specific or custom direction. That's where I see these tools being useful. If they are only there to amplify the existing factory system, I'm not interested, and I don't endorse that at all. But what we saw from Khan Academy was something really interesting, and that is this AI was literally watching Imran Khan, his son, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Watching his son do the work, recognize certain behaviors, challenging those behaviors with a certain set
Mm-hmm.
of custom questions for that particular individual, and then using that as their path towards better understanding. That was meaningful. So I'd like to see more of that.
Love that. 100% agreed. You touch on something interesting because data and having access to data will be how I think these new models, these multimodal AIs will be super beneficial. And so, two other announcements that I want to touch on. One, OpenAI announced their new desktop app for Mac. When you look at the
I've got
demo,
it.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's incredible because you can give it access to see your screen, and
right,
suddenly it becomes so much more useful. It's no longer just this AI in a chatbot that isn't aware of the context of the work that you're doing or the tools you're using. It becomes something so much more valuable. And it got me thinking about just data that you have access to. Of course, later this week, maybe around Thursday, OpenAI announced a new data analysis module that allows you to connect your Google Drive and your Microsoft OneDrive account. So
yeah. I couldn't get it to work. I don't know whether it just said that it's not available to me.
interesting.
But
I did it, and
mhm,
it's impressive to be able to just quickly reference a file from your Google Drive and then
yeah,
interact with it within the model. But when I think of what the advantage that Google has with Gemini is that it natively has access to your photos, your emails,
right,
all your files on Drive. And that's when the technology starts to become useful. And if Google can
right,
capitalize on that, they showed some demos at I/O. I think people are going to recognize that, oh, this is different. It's no longer this AI chatbot over there. It's present in the document I'm working in.
right. Yeah, I had a couple of conversations with some leaders this week. I asked them, what are they looking for?
Mhm.
What is the thing that they ultimately want from this technology? And what I heard from a couple of them is quite literally what you just described, and that is they want a co-pilot,
Mhm.
right? They want somebody who's their co-pilot, not a kind of just randomized, you know, clippy type
Yeah.
experience, but rather what is going on in your context? What are your files include? What's the content that you're putting into your
Mhm.
environment? Whether you're consuming that through channels, whether you're saving that, what is going on in your world? What is important to you? What are your priorities? And then start to surface the things that are meaningful to you. So, what I'm seeing is a trend towards it, just like we spoke about the education model, where it says, here's what you need. Now, I spoke about James, 8 year old. He is in that phase of his life where, learning is anything from the geographic location of something to how to actually, in his case, he's very tech centric. So it's like maybe how to hack a particular thing on his computer.
Yeah.
But then I've got a 21-year-old who's in the work environment, and he wants to accelerate his position where he is right now in an organization to another position. Now, the traditional way would be to go to university, get a degree, sit in classes, get into debt, all those kind of, unfortunate things,
Yeah.
waste 4 years or more.
Unbelievable.
And so the conversation that we have been having is, well, how do you use the tools available to get the knowledge that's there? So if he wants to be a design engineer or something like that, how would he get there? And the answer is, well, you could get there using that kind of co-pilot relationship, that assistant relationship to say, these are the things that are important.
Mhm.
Here's how I learn quickly. Here's where I want to end up. Can you help me get there? And actually participate as a partner in providing the steps and the necessary learning modalities to get there. And in which case, he might go from where he is now to an advanced position in a matter of months versus multiple years and without the cost of actually doing that at university. So, really big impact here, like really
Incredible. Yeah,
meaningful. And I think that we're not quite ready for that because we've got a lot of institutional inertia that we have to overcome.
you're right. And I think for companies that are in this AI space wondering, okay, what's our next move? How do we leverage the technology? It always has to be coming back to how are we delivering value? How are we solving actual problems? And I'm looking at
Mm,
OpenAI's maturity over the last 2 years, them moving away from focusing on, oh, this is just really advanced technology, to them
yeah.
recognizing this is how this technology is actually going to be useful in your life. We don't need to chase another improved model alone. We need to actually ensure that people can appreciate this delivering value. And then as the intelligence gets added on, it's great because I see it actually being useful in my life versus these
Mm.
benchmarks that they would always come out with. Oh, it performs X on this benchmark. Okay, what?
But you're hitting on something here, which is really important. Is that advanced technology tends to be this will have the assumption built into it that when the technology is available, it's available to all, and it's kind of like a rising tide raises all boats.
Yeah.
That hasn't really been, I would say, from an evolutionary perspective, a model that worked, right?
Mm,
Bigger isn't better, more isn't more. Universality is really just another word for homogeneous.
yeah. Yeah.
I think what we're seeing here is the trend towards making these things more personalized and more customized, which really means we're atomizing the technology.
Yeah.
Yes, there is an underlying model, for sure there is, but that underlying system or model has to deliver at the individual level for it to be truly valuable now. We've
Hmm.
had universal solutions that haven't worked. Think about energy. Energy is a really good example of this. Just because you've got a bigger power station and a bigger grid doesn't actually solve the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
We see brownouts and blackouts around the world still to this day.
Yep.
What really works is if you had an individual generator in every house. Now, what we don't want is an individual gas or diesel generator polluting the air. But when you start to look at what Taurus is doing, where they're individualizing that power unit to the resident or
Hmm.
business itself, where the power management, power storage, everything, and even the sourcing of the power through solar, everything is in individualized proportions. Now, we know that this works because the internet is a really good example of that. You
Yeah.
can't kill the internet, it's got too many nodes. A hive of bees is really, really impossible to get rid of. I had um, a, a wasp colony build a nest under my umbrella on my porch, and try and get rid of that, man. That is
Yeah.
that they will get you. Like at least one will get you. You may be able to kill the hive, but for sure one or two will
What will get
manage
you?
to get through. And I think we've seen that time and time again. Is that a distributed model, a model that allows itself to be atomized, is way more powerful and also more robust. Right? It's anti-fragile by nature, and that's interesting to me. Is because if I'm sitting at OpenAI or Google anywhere. My question isn't how can we build the next big model that needs another nuclear power
Mhm.
station to power it, but how do we take that technology and make it available to each individual and they can own it, they can power it. Yes, they will still have to get the foundational model from us, but how can they create the individual outcome that they're seeking for their family and their business?
It goes back to another point. I think there's this conversation about open source models and whether or not companies should be building their own models. And sure, you can get into the model building business, but ultimately you need intelligence that's solving problems. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think unless there is a really important need for you to try and build a better model, start thinking first from the problems that you're looking to solve, and see how you can leverage existing technology to solve that versus, hey, let's just invest all of this time and resources to build one other model that one ups the previous model. So I think it was a great week overall, just for companies to kind
Mm-hmm.
of step back and look look at what some of the bigger players are doing, see the missteps that they're making. One of the things I didn't particularly like about Google's week is that so many of their announcements were vaporware. They were products that they're coming out in September, and then they spoke about products for 2025. And I feel like there is this rush to try and prove that, hey, we're at the forefront of this and we're thinking way ahead. And I kind of appreciated OpenAI's more subdued approach, where it was like, hey, this same model that we have, we're going to show you how a better experience on top of this model
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
amplifies its powers. There, but again, I mentioned there's so many updates that Google released that were amazing. And
Yeah.
if you want, definitely hop on over to the Maginative website. You'll see they have new video models. They have new conversations around AI safety and security that I would encourage everyone to read.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we need to also mention is that you've been very focused on how these technologies can actually help people create new job opportunities for themselves. So upskill,
Yep.
improve their readiness for the obvious changes that are happening. You wrote a really lovely article on this, a big, nice, long editorial on specifically what the future for AI prompt engineers and prompt designers need to be thinking about, how they need to prepare for that, some of the resources that they can go to in order to find those skills. Um, and this is really a call to action. Anybody who's listening to this who hasn't already started doing this, check this out. Go read Chris's article on what prompt engineering or prompt design looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Get your teeth into this stuff. Uh, IBM has free courses. They have a 15-week boot camp on this, which I highly recommend. This, 15 weeks goes like a blink of the eye. Get ready, get the certifications. They're not really certifications. They're really just like, preparations.
Yeah.
This isn't a certificate-driven industry at all. Nobody's asking you what your degrees are. What they're asking you is, do you understand how to participate in this conversation?
Yeah.
And I think that the really, really good news for designers and engineers is that your fundamental skills are still relevant.
Yeah.
Your ability to work cross-functionally, your ability to understand problems and not jump into solutions straight away, your ability to be both divergent and convergent in your thinking, to be able to prototype, if that's the right
Mm-hmm.
word. I can't, I'm losing track of how fashionable things are, but, dive into MVPs, dive into prototypes, build stuff, use the tools, make it apparent that you have the ability to participate in the co-creation or co-authoring of these new things. It's going to matter. It's going to matter a lot. It's going to matter at every single level. And I think that we, as literacy, protagonists, as people who, can lean into this, we're really encouraging people to go and find. We have free courses. You have
Yep.
courses on LinkedIn Learning as well. Dive in there, make yourself relevant.
For a lot of people, I sometimes think sometimes there's fear, there is anxiety around whether or not this is going to be too much, is it too technical. What I would say is just start somewhere, ask questions. If you reach out to us on social media, we'll be able to point you to different resources. Definitely check out
Mm-hmm.
Maginative as your core resource to just stay up to date. But it's such an important time to invest in yourself. No, because being able to develop these skill sets will serve you both in your personal life and your professional and business lives also.
Yeah.
And so with that, I'm going to call it for this week. There are so many
Good.
stories for sure that I would love to keep talking about. One in particular, ElevenLabs, they have a new audio native feature where it can take any article on your website and turn it into a human narrated story. And
I need this. I
we
really need this.
we tried it. It takes like 30 seconds to implement on your website. So
Amazing.
if you're a business, you're trying to make your content more accessible, definitely check out what ElevenLabs Audio is doing. Hop on over to Maginative. As usual, we appreciate the support, and we have a paid subscription. You can subscribe to Maginative and support us that way. But subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check us out on your favorite
Yeah.
podcast. We are here every week putting out content, and expect a lot more content to come out. But any final thoughts, Richard?
Just keep in mind that AI isn't a solution. It's a beginning of a meaningful conversation.
I love that wisdom as always. All right, guys. With that, it's a wrap. As always, one love. Until next week. Take care.
Cheers, mate.